Hello chess fans! Today I wanted to look at some of Ding Lirens' game on his supposed Lichess account, which has over 70 games in lines that were featured in the recent match between Ding and Nepo for the World Chess Championship. So I think that most likely the account is Ding Lirens, and it also boasts a blitz rating of over 2700, not one that many people can get. So I particularly wanted to look today at the King's Indian attack game because I think it's a really interesting weapon, and the way Ding Liren plays it kind of shows a lot of ideas that are possible from it and how rich and deep of positions it can get. So the way that Ding tries to go for it is with knight f3. Ding is probably playing white here. d5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, e6. And the idea of this is that pretty much there's a lot of different setups that black can go for. For example, there's also this move c5, which I think is a little bit more critical, though even still after something like castles, knight c6, d4, going for a reverse Grunfeld. Notice that here the same Grunfeld plans probably won't work because white's simply up a tempo here. I think black center is crumbling. But instead, after e6, we can see a move like c4, and here white's doing very well in the database. So even though this is a testing way to play, I wouldn't really expect this at the top level. Now maybe a simpler way to play, and anyone who sees this setup on their own, they should maybe try for this move, c6. And the idea is we're going to go bishop g4, we're going to go knight bd7, and we're going to try to go for e5. If they play d4, we go for e6. And the idea is this pawn structure in the center is very solid against this bishop, and usually white doesn't get too much. A sample line here could continue with c4, which I think is a little bit of a risky line because of the fact that after takes, something like this, white has known to be doing pretty well in this position. Instead of that, they could also castle, and after bishop g4, b3 has been making the rounds at the top level recently as a nice weapon for blitz, but it doesn't really give any advantage. So recently this line has been going out of fashion because of the fact that this line with c6 kind of fully equalizes and doesn't really give much play to black. But instead we saw e6 in this game. After castles, we saw this move bishop e7, which just makes sense to develop. And here you can opt for a few setups. You can either go for this neo-Catalan where you sort of delay d4 and you try to find some way to justify that. Often this is done through the moves like b3 and maybe going for d3 and e4. So after d3, the idea is simply we want to go for this e4 push. And you might say, okay, why didn't you do that at the start then? And the idea is we want to close the position down a little bit so that there's more ideas to attack the opponent on the other side. Now here it doesn't really make any sense to go for this triangle because you've locked in this bishop. So maybe you should probably go for after castles, knight b2, this move c5. And so this is pretty much the main line of how this position might go, and it's around about even. But it's still surprising that Ding Liren has chosen this because of the fact that there are a lot of attacking chances in this. It might not fit his style. So after e4, we saw the move knight c6, rook e1, b5. And b5 is the main line. And the ideas for both sides here are as follows. White wants to lock down the center because when you lock down the center, it's easier to attack on the flanks. And black wants to lock down the center as well, but they also want to attack on the queen side. So for example, after this move b5, we see the move e5 and a knight d7. And so now you can see that the center is locked, so it's going to be easier for both players to get what they want. So what white is going to look to do is get this kingside avalanche, and black is going to look to do the same. So here we saw the move knight f1, pretty much allowing the bishop to develop, and also looking to get the knight behind the pawns, so that this will more so resemble white attacking with all their pieces. Here we saw this move a5, which is the main line. The idea is just simply to expand on the queen side, and either black is going to win on the queen side, white is going to win on the king side, or white's going to get a positional advantage, usually. So here we saw the move h4, and the idea is to create a square for the knight to jump in, also to play h5, and also to attack the queen generally. And here, Richard Rapport played pretty strange move. Here he played this move queen c7, which is not really that great. It doesn't really make sense with the plan either because we're not really looking to trade. We're not looking to win this pawn. Maybe more consistent with the plan is a4, and the idea is just to provoke some weaknesses. Now here white is doing very well in the database with knight 1 h2, but the main line for the purpose of analysis is a3, and after b4, something like this. Notice that white doesn't really want to take with the rook because of c4. B takes a3 and bishop a6. Here black is doing pretty well in the database with the fact that they have a lot of queenside counterplay, and they've opened the b file, which was one of their goals, and white hasn't really started on the king side. The more the position opens up, the worse white's position get because black's solid structure is going to give them a lot of compensation in any endgame. Okay, so queen c7, bishop f4 defending, rook e8. Again, this is really not very consistent with the plan. Richard Rapport pretty much is saying that he's going to develop his pieces like this and maybe is looking for a position outside of theory. And at the end of the day, maybe this isn't even Ding Liren and Richard Rapport. This is just a theory. But yeah, again, not very consistent. And now we're going to see kind of what dangers it can pose. After rook e8, we saw this move knight e3. Very good move looking for here. Notice that if takes here, there's knight g4. So, sorry, there's takes, and then knight g4 because For example, if we go knight g4 away, there's bishop at knight f3 check. So you would have to take, and then go knight g4, and here white would be completely winning. Okay, so instead we saw knight f8. Again, now this queen c7 move doesn't really make any sense if you're not going to take on e5. So here we saw h5, again expanding on the queen side, also preventing knight g6, which would attack the bishop. Here we saw h6. You really cannot allow white to get this off. Here we saw knight g4, an excellent move. And yeah, here it's possible that Ding could have done something else. For example, this move c4 might be slightly better. After takes, d4. Notice that white has aired out some squares for their pieces in this line, and the light squares become very weak. And white often threatens sacrifices like this. Not to mention, if black does a nonchalant move like bishop b7 here, take a few seconds to see if you can find the winning move for white. And when I say winning, I mean it is winning, but it's very difficult to see. So the move is knight f6 check. And the idea is that, okay, if the king moves to ha, we win the rook. So obviously they have to take somehow. If they take this way, their king side's getting crumbled. So you might say, okay, don't they take this way? Takes, and then take, keep their bishop alive. But after bishop h6, queen d2, queen g5, this is unstoppable mate, and white would be completely winning here. So that was a nice idea to see, possibly. Now, by all means, it's not forced here. Black has to go for this move, knight h7, but okay, knight h7 is a very sad move, and maybe knight d2 here, or queen d2 threatening sacrifices like this should be much better for white. Instead of that, we saw knight g4, which is, again, it's still a good move. But after here, notice that the e4 squared is not really covered, is covered here. So we can't get our knight in easily like this. Plus, it's harder to make these sacks work when, there's no easy way to bring in the rook in. Notice the rook also had the e4 square, maybe to jump to g4 in some positions. So here we see c3, maybe threatening d4, also solidifying. Bishop a6, and yeah, from this point the attack has mostly died down, but we saw that how dangerous it could get if black doesn't advance their plan. Black needs to do something immediately to get any counterplay in this position. So king h8, here we see some repetition. I'm not sure why this happened. Most likely these are players prepping, and they accidentally said that move or something. Bishop f1, b4, queen d2, advancing with the plan. Notice that, okay, if black chills here, there is some sack here followed by this. This would be quite devastating for black. For example, if black goes like bishop e7, maybe takes, check here, and okay, if king h8, this mate in one. If takes here, check, bishop g7, and you lose, or king h8 here, and it's very, very dangerous. I'm curious, what's the engine evaluation? Okay, engine evaluation is white is completely winning. Oh, now black is winning. So yeah, very, very, very double-edged position. So if you're looking for something to attack your opponent, then this is definitely a good option. So bishop f8, just defending against all that. c4 now. Again, now this c3 move kind of looks silly. Maybe you should have played c4 right away. c4, rook a8, queen c2, getting off the diagonal. And from here we see that black is just slightly better here. If white doesn't get the attack on, then black's structure is more than solid enough. They control more of the center. Their pieces are mostly still good, and they're sort of just carried by the fact that they have this endgame advantage, even though that, actually here their pieces are looking quite terrible. Knight e3, queen a8, a very excellent move, threatening to take here or go here and then take the knight. Knight d2, I had to get out of the way of that threat. Knight c6, knight f3, again, yeah, here probably a draw was offered, but the player with the black pieces wanted more here, and after d takes d4, knight d4 was a little bit of a mistake. That gives white a small positional advantage after takes, c takes d4. It's possible that black was counting on this, but after here and knight d6, the position is far superior for white. Not to mention that even white could take here, and after takes here again, black has the same weakness. So takes, here knight g4 was played, rook d7, b3, and yeah, here black just has this weakness, and white, even though they didn't get the queenside attack, the kingside attack, they've made black's pieces so terrible, and they've created a weakness here that white's position is overwhelming. Now here, if we notice, white takes their time, puts some pressure on the position, and eventually managed to win this pawn. But here white sort of blunders the game, actually. The engine only senses an inaccuracy, but I think this is a huge blunder here. White plays this move. It's a little bit rushed, because notice that black can't really do anything. If this knight moves, it's not really going anywhere, and it can't really go here right now because we cover this. But after takes here, we're in this really nasty pin, and for example, I think just immediately black can go for like this, get out of the way, trade off their bad piece, and we can't move anything. We're just stuck because of the fact that we're pinned. So maybe even black has time to do this. It's possible. Probably not, but at least black can try to win this pawn back at some point. But instead here, black went for rook c3 again, probably a little bit rushed. Takes, and here we saw this move knight e2. We saw knight c2. The player with the white piece only had 18 seconds here, so even more likely it's Ding because he's been down in time in every single game of the match. But knight e2 going here, something like this. And yeah, notice that white can't really win this pawn. Black can't get this pawn through, and white's probably going to pick it up. But instead of knight c2, which sort of just misses this move, rook d2, which is a very nice move. Notice that after takes, there's no way to stop the pawn. You have to go here, and then after takes, black is just winning. So instead here, knight a3. After rook d2, we saw b4 attacking the piece. Bishop takes f2, knight a3. And again, we see a big blunder, probably again under time pressure here. Maybe knight g5 is better after takes. Now we can threaten like here with check. Not to mention that even here, even this was better than the move that was played. But it's possible that black was worried about this. Takes. So you have to really get rid of the bishop. So bishop e3, probably a big mistake. c2, and I think probably this was missed. That this position is just a draw. And the rest of this game, white manages to win it because black gets some bad defense. Maybe we can go over where black really made a mistake. Here, black really just needs to get the knight in the game as quickly as possible. And for example, if they start pushing, it's honestly a very difficult defense, but black needs to get their king and their knight into the game as quick as possible. But instead of that, they tried to create their own passed pawn, which I guess they were thinking about winning this game in this position. And yeah, okay. After a while, they had to sack the knight and they lost the game. So yeah, I think an interesting game. If we see the King's Indian defense in the King's Indian attack in the match, I think it would be very telling that this is in fact Ding Liren's count. It is also definitely possible that these are not Ding Liren and Richard Rapport. These are maybe their seconds or something, and they are just playing random games in their opening lines to, maybe trick Jan or something like that. When we know that both the lines seen in game, I think 7 and the lines seen in game 1 with h3 have been featured on this account. So yeah, honestly, it's a great idea if this is somewhat of a diversion, but it's quite risky because the game played in like game 7 or 6, that was played around like in February. So if this was their account and they found this from earlier, then that would have been really risky because some of the prep would have at least been leaked. So most likely this is Ding Liren's account, and this is an accidental leak considering that he does live in China. So yeah, it's very interesting that this happened. I remember this happened to Karwan not some time ago in some like promotional video. They saw the screen or something, and it showed that he was looking for the Berlin and the Petrov, I think, something like that. And I think that was very interesting. So yeah, very interesting. This match has been very lopsided and topsy-turvy. And yeah, the King's Indian is definitely a very weird weapon. And I just wanted to talk about the candidates because I think it's quite interesting. So I'll see you guys in the next one.